You are listening to Talking Star Wars. Hello, I'm Connor,
And I'm Alex.
and today we're going to talk about Star Wars.
Particularly, we are going to expand upon a topic important to the Star Wars galaxy as a whole, and that is that of starships.
You can't have a science fiction franchise without some vehicle.
Well, you can, but this is not just, a cyberpunk, desperate tale on Earth. This is a galactic spanning space opera, so
Yes.
starships are essential.
It's what opens up the first film. There's a shot of a planet and then the two opposing forces as represented by their different starships.
Yeah, the Tantive 4 being pursued by Darth Vader's Star Destroyer is one of the most iconic cinematic shots. George Lucas had to pay a fine to have that shot be included with the opening credits.
Yeah.
So, starships have always been an important part of the lifeblood of Star Wars, but their aesthetic, their function, the way that they make the galaxy seem like both a huge space, but also one that people can traverse easily. This is not a setting where you need to hibernate in cryo sleep to get from planet to planet. Just pop into your hyperdrive, and whether it's a few hours or a few days later, as long as the route is mapped correctly, you'll hop out into the next planet on the other side.
Yeah, it's not quite hand wavy science because there's at least some narrative structure to how hyperspace works and how anti-gravity works, but it's just trusted. It's part of the background wallpaper of this universe. But each starship, whether it's part of the large Imperial force or it's a personal cruiser, each ship's design represents the nature of that faction, that culture, or that specific character.
Yeah, so in this episode, we're going to look a little bit more at the types of ships that we see, different manufacturers and aesthetics of ships. Then we're going to talk about some specific cool ships, who uses them, why, and how, what role they're filling. Is it the family van? Is it home? Is it a dramatic attack craft? And why are ships so cool?
When we look at Star Wars, there are many that you can point out and say, it's like a cool car. Like, you love the aesthetic design of it, you love how it's kind of a used future rustic look or how it's polished, but just off the top of your dome, what's your top one or two or three favorite ships that just have personality and class?
Well, I like the Ghost from Rebels, the Razor Crest from the Mandalorian, and, I mean, who doesn't love the X-Wing?
Very classic in its design.
Honorable mention to the Star Destroyer, or inspired by the Venator, just being, a giant wedge of death in space.
Yes, the most powerful shape is a triangle, so the fact that the Imperial design focuses on those triangular shapes is not accidental.
Yeah. With special mention, I suppose, to Grand Admiral Thrawn's personal Star Destroyer, the Chimera, with its dragon pattern drawn on the underneath for intimidation reasons. It is the most terrifying Star Destroyer.
I've got to go with Boba Fett's Slave One. I've heard they're changing the name of that for reasons, but the unique utility of the ship to be able to take off and then rotate in order for its bottom thruster to be its now forward-moving thruster is just nothing have I ever seen before. Something that takes off and has that sort of mechanical moving is just quite interesting. And then you can't discount the Millennium Falcon as one of the most classic vehicles of media, period, not just Star Wars, but its transcendence as far as an abstract shape that flies and has function goes.
Not everyone recognizes it, as Palpatine infamously said, "What's an aluminum falcon?" Who are they, Connor? Who are they? All right. But yeah, so whether it's a cool ship, a weird ship, a dangerous ship, an unarmed ship, people use ships to get around in Star Wars.
Yeah.
There are warships, cruisers, fighters, and a variety of ships all in between. They have hyperdrives, they don't have hyperdrives. They have life support, they don't have life support. They're the home to a ragtag misfit group of rebels. They store bounties in their holds, so ships can be home to some characters, and they can just be they can be space taxis for others.
Yeah. So maybe let's think of the ships with the most, I don't know, that feeling of home that you bring up. This isn't just Luke's X-wing that he gets in to fly and crash into Dagobah, nor is it the Imperial, war cruiser. But what makes the Millennium Falcon, the Ghost, the Razor Crest stand out as homes and not just these cars that people drive around in space?
Well, I mean, Han Solo in The Force Awakens even says, "Chewie, we're home,"
Mhm.
when he steps back in the Millennium Falcon for the first time in years.
Yeah, direct
So,
connection. Yeah.
so I think I mean, it's hard to, for Han, the Millennium Falcon represents, it is his home. It's where his
Mhm.
stuff is. It's representing the ability to fly anywhere he wants and not be tied down. It's memories tied up into it. It's his
Yeah.
escape. It is his palace. It is his place where he feels like he belongs, knows where everything is, and has control over his destiny while inside.
It's very much represented by his actions in that ship, where he alone knows how it functions, uh, even though it hardly functions half the time. And just from the visual aesthetic of the ship alone, where it is so used, dirty, it has other functions. It has casual seating areas. It has gunners, which my home doesn't have a gunner, crow's nest, but back in the day, I wouldn't discount, wouldn't say that didn't happen, but uh, it's just the way that he kind of kicks up his legs in his own ship, where it feels like this is his grubby domicile. It's a reflection of the dirty man who pilots the ship. What about the Ghost? How does that differ as a home?
Yeah, so the Ghost is less, it's not, it's owned by Hera Syndulla, who is the captain of the Ghost. It is also the home of the Spectres, who is the rebel cell that inhabits the Ghost. But more so than just being like the private domicile of one person, it comes to be the home for the whole Ghost crew. The ship follows them around through the whole series and serves as their base of operations, even when they primarily are on one planet for a time. It is both a stealth ship, a freighter, a fighter. Hera shows herself to be one of the most dangerous pilots alive while flying it. It has a little shuttle that can detach and send an away team away. It can't be tracked because it can scramble its transponder. So the Ghost overall, it has personality. Sort of like you can picture the layout of the Millennium Falcon in your head. You can do the same to the Ghost. You know where people's cabins are. You know where the gunner seats are. You know that it has strong shields and turns fast, but is never quite as fast as a fighter. You know that it follows the same internal rules of scrambling its signature. So, just a level of attention, of detail, and care shown to what the Ghost can and can't do. It makes it feel like a living, breathing, almost like a character in its own right.
Mhm. When we take that same sort of benchmark and we compare it to the Razor Crest Din Djarin ship, even though it's voluminous, it has space. It is also cramped at the same time. In the cockpit, it's in our opening episode we have him and his bounty sort of cramped together in his cockpit, and it's uncomfortable. It's not meant for a crew. It's meant for uh, one man who needs every tool that he needs against the galaxy in order to make his way.
Yeah, so the Razor Crest is definitely the home of Din Djarin,
Mhm.
um, and it's an important part for a Mandalorian whose home planet has been glassed and is no
Mhm.
longer inhabitable. So Din lives aboard the ship, and he has an attachment to it, so where he keeps all of his stuff. And what makes it seem really cool is that it looks kind of like the Millennium Falcon,
Mhm.
like a hunk of junk on the outside. But
Uh,
Din Djarin is able to use his skills and his piloting ability to make it dance.
And that's kind of the commonality amongst these three ships. The Ghost isn't a sleek Nabooian cruiser, which we'll talk about in a bit. It's an oblong, strange trapezoidal shape. So the Millennium Falcon is kind of this flying saucer with teeth on it. It's these just unusual aesthetic choices that give the ships personality. And inside, again, they have that grubbed, used, greasy feel that all the great Star Wars.
The Ghost is
Yeah,
not that grubby.
sure,
Hera would not let her ship get grubby. But
sure.
the other ones that we certainly mentioned are
Mhm.
fairly grubby.
So yeah, these are our campers, our mobile homes of the Star Wars universe. Do we have any other ships like that? I mean, we don't really in the sequel trilogy because it's the Millennium Falcon again.
The Bad Batch themselves, they steal a Imperial landing craft, which they call the Marauder, and it is their ship and home throughout the rest of the series so far. So the Marauder certainly fills that. I mean, there's even part of an episode dedicated to our clone military figures, used to not having their own private space, and so they just sleep in the bunk and keep their stuff piled up. But our teenage girl who has joined the crew kind of needs her own private space to feel like she, can retreat from her manly brothers at times, and so one of the defunct gun turrets sort of becomes her retreat. And so it's a way of making, and it's a way of that the clones in the Bad Batch are not used to needing to have a home to go back to, but where most individuals do have that instinct of needing an area or a space to call their own. So you definitely get that sense from the Marauder, and the one time it is stolen in the Bad Batch series, it causes a great deal of distress until they get it back.
Sure.
Other ships that Lando has a ship, the Lady Luck, that as appears in the Shadow of the Sith and in other works, but for him that's mostly just like Lando's abode. It's got his cape closet.
And that's one of the strongest parts of Solo is when we get to see the Millennium Falcon under his captainship and how much cleaner it is, and again, utilitarian and storing his capes and having an escape pod. Much more of a sleeker design as well.
Yeah, and we can talk about some other ships, such as certain cruisers that become home to like entire platoons and companies of rebellion troops, to the way in which how Imperials inhabit their Star Destroyers as moving cities. But as far as this like medium-sized freighter home to a ragtag group, that's probably the list. There's a Star Wars Resistance. You even get something like the Colossus, which is a refueling station and platform, but that's more like a mobile town or city than a ship.
You have the supremacy in the First Order, and that's sort of the ultimate accomplishment as far as a very large Imperial living weapon goes. It's massive. It is the living quarters for Snoke for the majority of his the screen time in life. But it again shows that the First Order is so much more focused on military might and not comfort or art or culture. They are a military force, and it's the ultimate expression of that.
Yeah, so I think this can lead us into a greater discussion, and we can talk about capital ships and other things later. But there's the aesthetic and the appearance of these ships. So the Millennium Falcon is fairly unique. People might call it like a YT-1300 freighter, but really it's the Millennium Falcon.
We see no other freighters of this nature in the series.
It's apparently modular. It can be changed. We don't see anything else like the Ghost, which is apparently a custom one. And even the Marauder, which is sort of just a late Republic shuttle, is even painted a different color and has aspects customized to make it look more unique. The Razor Crest, we see other ships sort of like a Razor Crest, but no, there is no other Razor Crest that we see in the series. So it's this sort of uniqueness that makes those other ships feel like home. But there's other different cultures in Star Wars starting to have different aesthetic senses for how they make their ships. And then we also have the more uniform ships, such as the X-Wing, the TIE Fighter, the Star Destroyer.
Yeah, that's what it's born from. Do we get a Y-Wing in A New Hope, or does that come later on?
No, Y-Wings were half the attack force that attacked the Death Star.
All right, so we have some variety, and it's good to show that the Empire is all uniform. It was all TIE Fighters. Darth Vader gets his own special modified one because he's Darth Vader.
As the war goes on, that you realize that you just specialize when you're actually fighting a war and not just suppressing a population. But
branch out to the TIE Interceptor and different TIE machines that had different locations where the cockpit was for weapons and other various utility.
Yeah, so you start to see the different aesthetics. So back in the time of the Republic, you had the sort of red and white aesthetic of the Republic with sort of the high-tech S-foils and things on Republic fighters. So you have lots of sleek technology being rapidly iterated upon in the Republic era. And then things fragment significantly after that. And when we get to the time of the Empire has their own chosen aesthetic. It is giant, deadly triangles. It is
Square wings.
square
With
wings
your
of the TIE fighters.
Or TIE fighters, yes.
And one big death moon. Those are your options if you want ships. Yeah, we got some other ships. Yeah, you get your light cruisers and your interdictor cruisers and your lambda shuttles. But
And your rebels, you have again your alphabet based fighters with your X-wings, your Y-wings, which again perform very much in the shapes of those letters.
Yeah, and Y-wings are old Republic craft from the Clone Wars that have been repurposed. X-wings are newer. The B-wing was invented during the Rebellion period.
There's an A-wing, correct?
Was a modified stunt fighter. Yep.
There we go. So you have a little bit more of a sense of ragtag when it comes to the Rebellion, and it's not even in this humanoid technology, because by the time we get to The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, you get the
Mon Calamari.
Yes, you get the Mon Calamari cruiser, which looks like absolutely nothing that ever existed, period. It looks like a French drawing by Moebius in the heavy metal comic books. It's organic.
So then we start to see these other aesthetics. So you see, if you're the Empire, you get gray, black, white, and red if you're lucky on your aesthetic of your ship. And it's all uniform. It's intended to be intimidating, part of the faceless military might of the Empire. Then you get to the capital ships made by the Mon Calamari, renowned shipbuilders, who they build them in their great underwater shipyards, pump all the water out, and then fly them into orbit, and who have made many ships for the Rebellion. And no two look the same. They are all unique, including Home One, which is one of the largest cruisers that is in the Imperial fleet, or the Rebel fleet. And they are sort of organic looking with a lot of round lines, not the sharp geometric shapes of the Star Destroyers. They have a sort of softer, sort of brownish coloration rather than the harsh industrial gray. They're still very well armed and very large, but they are very different than the Star Destroyers.
So it's very two-sided in our original recipe, original trilogy Star Wars. When we get to the prequel trilogy, we get to see some other cultures and their ships. Like Naboo has very sleek in a different way. It's not sort of organic and abstract like the Mon Calamari cruisers, but it's very regal, very, very, very sleek. Not really no edges or curves at all. It's just everything kind of ends in points. And the finish on everything is very metallic, which shows up in Din's Naboo.
The N2 starfighter that Din Djarin eventually ends up replacing the Razor Crest with.
That one.
Adapted from a Naboo fighter.
Great touch in that era where it's just pre-Empire. It has, it has no papers. You can get away with pretty much anything in it.
Yeah, so we start to see these other cultures that have produced the other ships. You have the organic-looking underwater-built ships of the Mon Calamari, the industrial, frightening uniformity of the Empire, the old, sort of elegant, rapidly changing ships of the old Republic, the droid-based ships with lots of geometric shapes, and again more conformity in the CIS, the Confederacy of Independent Systems, the SEPs as they were called.
Even in the Republic ships that, say, Anakin and Obi-Wan would pilot, those are more personalized and they had different colors, but the cockpits were very much akin to the TIE fighters. So it's a little foreshadowing of where this technology will be going, just with different overall forms.
Yeah, and then you start to see other cultures, though, that have different starfighters. Like the Mandalorians, we see their starfighters. They fire yellow projectiles instead of red. They have this sort of like rotating gyroscope design.
And that kind of falls into
pointed wings.
Almost like somewhat similar to Slave One with Boba Fett's ship, where it has that maneuverability when they take off, but the design is still very much unique. For Slave One at least. But it's a nice connective tissue between two connected cultures.
Yes, you see, the Mandalorians have their own style of ships, and then we also see, a lot of the CIS's ships are based off of Trade Federation designs. We see that the Umbarans have their own type of ships in the Umbaran arc in the Clone Wars. Lots of, again, more organic-looking technology, but kind of a dark, more goth aesthetic than the Mon Calamari go for.
And I know there are giant space whales, but is anyone piloting the giant whale?
Only if your name is Silo the Fourth. Yeah, there is a imperial scientist who does build his ship inside a giant space whale, a Purgle, before Darth Vader Jedi mind tricks it to fly into a sun, thereby proving that you have to be careful when you fuse organics and technology.
It's fair.
Because, yeah. So, mostly the Purgle are not ships. And it was a bad idea to make one into one. But
And, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up the sequel trilogy a little bit more. I mean, we do have some advancements in X-Wings where they're a little bit more sleek. We have some bombers, which I don't believe we've seen before on the Resistance side, and that was in The Last Jedi, and those were visually impressive, even though the anti-gravity doesn't really make sense if you're dropping bombs in space. But again, this science is not the most important aspect of Star Wars. The story
we could do a whole prequel book about Cobalt Squadron and how they're these adapted bombers. They're often also used as mining devices to get through thick ice. So again, the Resistance using whatever they can get their hands on.
Yeah.
But mostly by the time of the New Republic, it looks like their military has pretty been uniformed into the X-Wing as the vehicle of choice.
Mm-hmm.
We do
it's
not
efficient. It's the Honda Civic of the Star Wars universe.
I think it was the cutting edge. Like the A-Wing was sort of an adapted, desperate stunt fighter. The B-Wing was an experimental heavy weapons platform made for fighting capital ships. And by the time war breaks out with the First Order, the New Republic was caught completely by surprise. So really, the X-Wing is sort of the jack of all trades. It's the patrol car. It's got enough firepower, as we can see in the Mandalorian season 1. 3 X-Wings are more firepower than like an entire space station has. When 2 X-Wings show up, Din Djarin knows he is fucked. He has even with all his piloting skills and the Razor Crest being the sort of a work of love for him. The X-Wing is a dangerous and sleek ship, so even 1 X-Wing represents a significant amount of power, and so that continues into the sequel era where we see in the hands of Poe Dameron and a single X-Wing can shoot down way more TIE fighters, even the more advanced TIE fighters of the First Order.
And reflected in the First Order, we have X-Wings again. And it's, it makes sense. They're going off of the Imperial design of mass production.
We have TIE fighters.
TIE fighters, thank you. We're going off the TIE fighters. And
they do add proton torpedoes and shields because they realize, hey, which is sort of stealing a design aesthetic from Grand Admiral Thrawn at the time, who was like, we can't just let the rebels have fighter superiority. We can no longer assume that we will have numerical superiority and just raw weight of numbers in every situation. We got to have individual superiority as well. But then Tarkin was like, no, Project Stardust. And Palpatine was like, oh, very well, Project Stardust. So
then are we missing anything as far as, notable cultural ships, notable individual ships?
Well, the Geonosians had unique ships. We see Count Dooku has his own personal Geonosian solar flyer.
And those, again, are organic in a similar way to the Mon Calamari, not visually in any sense, but these ships feel very crude, I shouldn't say crude because they're not lacking any advancement, but they just feel more organic. They feel like they're made maybe out of organic parts, like that, solar foil could have been grown.
Yeah, so it's always interesting to see these different technologies sort of intersect in how they're using the same base, like hyperdrive, sublight engines, shields, but they all have these different... Because the species and cultures in Star Wars are so diverse, it's good to see that reflected in their ship designs. We even see this in, the ancient Sith dreadnought that we find in Rebels. Even that, it has a hyperdrive. It has all these other pieces to it, even though it's also, a giant black mountainous, device.
Yeah, so what potential is there in what Star Wars could do? What avenues haven't they explored when it comes to ship designs or ship capabilities that would be interesting for them to explore?
Oh, so they have totally realized how cool ships are by the time of the Mandalorian, at least. Like, everyone, you want a Razor Crest, don't you?
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, you know how much it'll hurt the audience if Moff Gideon blows up the Razor Crest? Do it. And he's going to kidnap Grogu. He took his ship and his gun and his child, so it's...
This is the lowest of the lowest points.
Yeah, and the ship was not just his car, it was his home. So I think Star Wars has always been aware that cool ships don't just represent an aesthetic element to the series, but also an emotional attachment that characters and by extension viewers have to their ships. Like Luke treats technology in a very utilitarian way, which suits sort of his later attitude as a Jedi. When he crashes his X-wing, both on Dagobah and later when he's in exile, does not particularly bother him. But when the Millennium Falcon is stolen and ends up on Jakku, Han Solo is offended, and he's been looking for the Millennium Falcon for years. When the Ghost is taken, when the Marauder is taken from the crews of the Bad Batch and the Rebels, it is a big deal. When the Colossus, the community ship on which our protagonists and Resistance live, it is the unifying factor between pirates and ex-Imperials and ex-New Republic. All of them come together to defend their home.
So in really the most successful Star Wars, or I should say, the most notable ships in Star Wars stand out for their design and stand out for their connection to character. So I think I'm going to make a connection that you brought up in our previous episode on just the war genre in Star Wars, and the idea that hasn't been explored, where the good guys have never had a super weapon. And I'm not going to say let's give the good guys a Death Star, but let's give the Jedi a space station. And instead of having a planet that's a temple, it's this moving space station where Jedi travel, gather students, and teach. Not have any sort of offensive capability, but it's just merely this reflected positive side of what a space station could be in the Star Wars universe.
And I think for all that I don't talk about Star Wars Resistance much, that is a show that explores how a space station like this can become home to not just a small group, but to an entire community.
Yeah.
And it's probably the strongest part of that show is you have the different factions and people that live on the Colossus. Transient commerce is going, but places to where this space station has become their entire home. And it can wander the galaxy and go places, but it also remains the home of other individuals. And it's, we also see that on some of the, like Home One and other Rebel cruisers, where in the novel The Twilight Company, they get very attached to their capital ship. It's the only one they have, and when it is destroyed in the novel, it's a big deal. That was their home. Yeah. That was how they got from fight to fight and planet to planet.
That brings to mind, we're wrapping the episode up, but did we make a mistake by not bringing up the Death Star as a ship? Is that a ship, or is that a small moon?
So I think we can touch on the Death Star briefly, and that it's hard to have a ship larger than the Death Star. Mm-hmm. And in fact, when we get to Starkiller Base, it's not. It is
it's a planet.
It is ascended shiphood, and really, the Death Star is just sort of a mobile planet.
Mm-hmm. There's no chase with the Death Star.
No, the Death Star arrives. It is an installation, so it is not doing the same thing where it's calling to mind certain parts of a mobile home and a sailing ship from the 1700s, where this small vessel can become someone's home. The Death Star is an expression of industrial supermight. So it is taking even a Star Destroyer could still have a sense of community. That's more of a floating city. A Star Destroyer is a floating planet.
While it does move and travel to planets to destroy, it's never part of the narrative where it's like, and then the Death Star arrived. It's just, no, it doesn't really matter what the proximity is to the planet where the Death Star is. It will destroy that planet. It's a giant space gun, so it doesn't act so much as a ship, even though it is pretty cool looking. Yeah. In the universe, not cool. Genocide bad, but...
Yeah, to give honorable mentions to other cool ships that we haven't talked about, we have, we talked about the Millennium Falcon, the Ghost, the Slave One, the Marauder, the Razor Crest, the Chimera, which is Grand Admiral Thrawn's personal Star Destroyer.
Darth Maul is a cool-looking ship.
Yeah,
in Phantom Menace.
Yeah, his Sith Interceptor. Mm-hmm. We have the Gauntlet, which is Bo-Katan's dropship present in The Mandalorian, which represents like 50% of the firepower that they get in that series.
But yeah, it's, like up top, we can't have a solid science fiction without a means of travel that makes it interesting, whether it be our DeLorean or our traveling telephone booth.
Yeah. That said, as cool as the Millennium Falcon is, let it rest for a while. We've already shown that we will like the Razor Crest and the Ghost. Give us something new. Let us get a new ship to get really attached to and then devastated when it's stolen.
This thing belongs in a museum. Just let it rest.
Like even in the Bad Batch, like when the Marauder was stolen, I was ready to shank someone. So give us other ships to get attached to. We'll find them attached because ships are cool and people like them.
Yes. So thank you once again for joining us for a discussion on the franchise and the galaxy at large with Star Wars, and join us again when we delve yet again back into the pool of Star Wars.
All right, join us next week for more Star Wars, and thank you for listening.